Hi all. I hope you're all good and you're all well and not getting too bored at home. We're missing you lots and lots. I'm going to tell you another story today, and because it's going to be Easter soon, I thought I'll tell you a story about a rabbit, and it's called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. It's a nice story. Let's do some good sitting and some good listening. Okay? So here we go. So it's the tale of Peter Rabbit. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They had lived with their mother in a sea bank underneath the root of a big fir tree. See, that's a big fir tree, and those are the roots, and they live underneath the roots there in a hole. "Now, my dears," said Mrs. Rabbit one day, "you may go into the fields, you may go into the lane, but do not go into Mr. Gregory's garden. He will not be happy. So remember, don't go in Mrs. Gregory's garden. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going to go out to the baker's." So Mrs. Rabbit took her basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns, one for each 4 bunnies and one for herself. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail were good little bunnies, and they went down the lane to gather some blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight to Mr. Gregory's garden and squeezed through the through into the gate underneath. First he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. Yum, yum. He's enjoying them. And then he was feeling rather sick, so he went to look for some parsley. Now, round the end of the cucumber frame, who should he meet but Mr. Gregory? Ooh, Mr. Gregory was on his hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate which led to his house. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe among the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs, so that I think he might have to go even more faster. But unfortunately, he ran into a gooseberry net. See, there's a net there. He got caught in that. One of his large buttons in his jacket got caught in the net, and it was quite a new jacket. Peter gave himself up for lost, and he was crying and he was very upset. And then there was a friendly sparrow looking at him and saying, "Oh," he said, "if I was you, I'd get up and run fast." Mr. Gregory came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop off Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. And he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in, except it was full of water. So what's going to happen is he's going to get all wet and cold. Mr. Gregory was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the shed. So he looked underneath all the pot plants, and he began to carefully turn them, looking under each one of them. Presently, Peter, what happens when you're very cold? He sneezed. Achoo! And Mr. Gregory was after him in no time. And he tried to put his foot on top of him, but Peter, who jumped out of the window And he was upsetting 3 plants as he went by, dropping them all, and there was such a big mess now. And Mr. Gregor ran after him, but he couldn't go through the window, and he was very tired now chasing him, so he carried on doing his garden. Peter sat down to rest, and he was out of breath, and he was trembling with fear, and he had not the least idea which way to go, so he was lost. And also he was very damp and wet from sitting in that can of water. After a time he began to wonder about going quietly, sneaking quietly, and looked around him, and he found a door in the wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit like him to squeeze underneath. And there was a mouse going by. He had lots of peas in his mouth, so he couldn't talk and couldn't show Rabbit which way to go. Then he tried to find his way straight across to see if he could see the gate. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. Gregley filled up his water can. A white cat was staring at some goldfish, and Peter Rabbit thought, I won't disturb him, and he walked past him. He went back towards the tool shed,